In December 2011, a team of 4 divers off the coast of California spent just over an hour cutting a humpback whale free from several hundred pounds of commercial crab trap lines. The ropes had wrapped around the animal's body, around the tail, the pectoral fins, through the mouth, with enough tension that some had begun cutting into the skin. The whale weighed roughly 50,000 pounds. At any point during the operation, a single movement could have killed any of the divers working around it. The whale barely moved. When the last line came free, the team surfaced and waited. The whale didn't leave. It swam in slow circles around the divers for several minutes. Then it did something none of them were prepared for. It approached each person in the water individually. It nudged them gently with its head. It dove underneath them and surfaced close by, working through the group one by one, as if it were doing something deliberate. One of the divers described it afterward as the most extraordinary experience of his life. He said it felt intentional, like the whale understood, on some level, who had been in the water with it. We can't confirm what the whale was experiencing. We may never be able to. But it came back when nothing was forcing it to, when it was already free, when every instinct for self-preservation should have been pulling it toward open water. And the question that's been sitting at the center of animal cognition research for decades is, what exactly is happening inside an animal when it does something like that? Let's start with what memory actually looks like in animals, because most people picture it wrong. Scientists divide animal memory into 2 categories. Semantic memory, general knowledge, like knowing that a specific sound means danger, and episodic memory, the ability to remember a specific event at a specific time involving specific individuals. For most of the 20th century, the assumption was that episodic memory was uniquely human. The reasoning was that reliving a particular past experience required a kind of self-awareness other animals simply didn't have. Then the research started arriving, and it kept contradicting that assumption. In 1998, researchers at Cambridge University tested western scrub jays, small birds roughly the size of a closed fist. The study demonstrated that these birds could remember not just that they had cached food somewhere, but what specific food they had hidden, where exactly, and how long ago. Not general food location, specific food, specific place, specific elapsed time. That is episodic memory. In a bird whose entire brain is the size of a large grape, elephants have been documented returning to the precise locations where family members died, sometimes years later, and standing there in silence, using their trunks to touch the bones. No foraging happening, no survival function being served. They are returning to a specific place associated with a specific event involving a specific individual they knew. Chimpanzees in captivity have accurately recognized the faces of other chimpanzees they hadn't encountered in more than 25 years, with recognition rates that parallel human performance on equivalent memory tasks. The infrastructure for long-term individual memory is clearly there. The question is whether it extends to us. In 2013, a competitive freediver named Yang Yun was participating in an underwater breath-holding competition at an aquarium facility in China. No breathing equipment, just holding her breath and descending as far as she could into a tank she shared with a beluga whale named Mila. At roughly 20 feet down, the muscles in her legs locked up from the cold water. She couldn't kick. She couldn't generate enough movement to return to the surface. She began sinking. Mila swam underneath her, pressed her head against Yang Yun's legs, and pushed her upward. By the time Yang Yun understood what was happening, she was already at the surface breathing. Belugas are highly social animals with documented histories of assisting distressed individuals, usually other belugas. It's possible Mila was responding to the physical signs of struggle the way she might respond to a struggling pod member. But Yang Yun had worked in that facility with Mila for 2 years, and Mila didn't push her toward the edge of the pool. She pushed her straight up, to air. The clearest evidence for long-term individual recognition comes from cases where significant time passes between the original encounter and the reunion. Because if an animal is responding to a smell from an hour ago, that's one kind of thing. If it responds after years with something that looks like affection rather than just familiarity, that becomes harder to explain away. Damien Aspinall runs a wildlife foundation that rehabilitates primates and releases them into protected forests in Gabon. In 2004, he released a gorilla named Quibi, who had been raised in captivity at a wildlife park in England. After release, Quibi integrated fully into a wild forest group. He avoided all human contact. For 5 years, there was no communication of any kind. In 2009, Damien returned to the forest. By this point, Queeby was a full-grown silverback, over 400 pounds, living entirely on his own terms, in his own territory. The people at the foundation advised against making contact. Approaching a wild silverback on his own ground is a serious risk under any circumstances. They told Damien not to go. Damien went anyway. He called out into the trees. Queeby came. He pressed his face against Damien's. He held him. He sat beside him for hours in the forest, occasionally reaching for his hand. Then he stood up and walked back into the trees. 5 years. No contact. No conditioning cues. Nothing to eat involved. And he came when he heard the voice. So what is actually happening in the brain when this occurs? Researchers studying the neuroscience of social memory in mammals have found that many large-brained social species, primates, elephants, cetaceans, form long-term individual memories through hippocampal pathways that closely parallel the ones humans use to retain significant personal experiences. The hippocampus doesn't store information neutrally. It tags experiences with emotional weight. Events that carried intense fear or relief or warmth get encoded differently from routine information. They get weighted. And weighted memories are significantly more resistant to fading over time. An animal that was starving, injured, or trapped, and then experienced the specific sensation of that threat being removed by a particular individual, doesn't simply record human, safe. It records something closer to a full experiential impression. The fear before, the relief after, and the specific combination of sound and scent and physical contact associated with the exact moment the danger ended. That is why recognition holds across years. The original event carried enough emotional weight to leave a stable, durable impression. A wildlife rehabilitator in South Africa named Karen Trendler, who has spent decades working with critically injured animals, described the pattern plainly in an interview. She said the animals that were closest to dying when they first came in are almost always the ones who respond most strongly to her when they encounter her later. She didn't frame it as loyalty. She said it seems like they remember the specific moment they stopped being afraid, and they associate that moment with her face, her voice, her smell. That is different from recognizing a food source. That is remembering a turning point. Christian Afonso, a conservationist in Brazil, rescued a jaguar cub named Jiquitaya from a logging site. She had been found abandoned and malnourished. 4 years after the rescue, footage of a reunion between them went viral. A full-grown jaguar swimming toward him in open water and wrapping her paws around his shoulders the way a domestic cat greets someone familiar. Christian has noted in interviews that Jiquitaya doesn't behave this way with other caretakers at the sanctuary. She tolerates them. She approaches him. He has also observed that she has become more gentle with him over time, not less, which is precisely the opposite of what you'd expect from an animal that's simply conditioned to associate a person with food delivery. Wild animals don't get more gentle toward things they're using. They get more comfortable with things they trust. That distinction appears to exist for them as clearly as it does for us. Here is what the science can say with reasonable confidence right now. Large-brained social animals, great apes, elephants, cetaceans, some corvids, possess memory systems sophisticated enough to retain specific individuals across years. The emotional tagging of significant experiences through hippocampal function appears to be a cross-species mechanism that predates humans by tens of millions of years. The documented cases of animals recognizing the specific humans who helped them are consistent enough in pattern to resist explanation as coincidence or simple conditioning. What the science cannot yet determine is whether any of this involves something we would recognize as gratitude, whether there is a subjective experience. I remember what you did, accompanying the recognition. We don't have a method for measuring that yet, but the humpback whale off the California coast circled back when it was already free. The current was pulling it toward open ocean. Nothing in its environment required it to do anything other than leave. It came back to each person in the water individually, deliberately, one by one. Whether what it experienced in those minutes resembles what we call gratitude, we can't say for certain. But it came back when it didn't have to. And sometimes that's the only part of the answer that matters.